Hello and welcome to episode 92 of Recruiting EQ. What employees really want. And we had wrote this out was what employees really want. Ellipsis, a house is what they really want. Housing assistance. We've got our special guest today, Larry Salazar. Larry, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's a pleasure to be here to join you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Larry, you and I did not know each other until recently. And recently we've gotten into a whole bunch of interesting conversations. But this was new to me, the idea of what you guys are doing at Nest Steps. And I'm very interested in diving into what you do, what you're bringing to the table, and how you came across starting this company. Um, we are going live, as people will see. If you are seeing this currently live, then feel free to comment and ask any questions. I know that the idea, the topic of housing, and depending which city you're in, some people are talking about a housing crisis, hot button topic. Gen Z people and millennials often say on social media, what's the point? I'm never going to afford a house. Like, it's something you see online a lot. So anybody who has any opinions, questions for Larry, for myself, for anything related or comments, please do pop them in here. And when there's a bit of a lull in the conversation, I'll be happy to get to them and we can sort of weigh in on the whole housing thing as we go.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
So Larry, before we get started and heavily into the topic of Nest Steps and what you guys are, what's your mission statement here, I would love it if you could give our listeners a little bit of backstory, maybe like a brief, overview of who you are and what you do. Maybe a little story on like what made the man we see before us today. Like, how did you get here to where we are?
Yeah, like you said, my name is Larry Salazar. I'm the president and co-founder of Nest Steps, where we transform home ownership into an employee benefit. And it's been a long story. I didn't start this way, obviously. Many years ago, I've many years ago, I found myself drawn to the American dream, the dream of having a family, having kids, right, and a place to call home. And when I say many years ago, I mean when I was a little kid. That has always been a passion of mine, home ownership, because I always knew that this wasn't just, a place where you're safe and secure from the rest of the world. It's also a place where you have experiences in life. The
Mhm.
most precious experiences occur in the home. And so for me, it's a very powerful place to be. And I didn't know how powerful it was until many years later when I was living in Southern California, renting a home with my wife, and I was working for a great company called Boeing. And everybody's probably heard of Boeing, right? Great company, great culture, and so forth. But I couldn't afford a home at the time. We
Yeah.
were only renting. And, these brand new condos came on the market. I think they were about $150,000 brand new. And boy, I missed out on a great opportunity back then. Because I'll tell you what, when they came out on the listing, I thought to myself, wow, I want to own a home, but my wife and I really didn't know what to do, how to go about doing it. We weren't sure if we could qualify for a loan and so forth. And we passed on that opportunity. And about 2 years later, I ended up taking a job somewhere else for a position that was paying slightly higher in a location that was much more affordable. And so I left Boeing. And if you talk to anyone who works for that company, they'll tell you, are you crazy? You left Boeing? That's a great place to be. Everybody wants to get in, not get out.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, the draw of home ownership was what left me feeling empty while I was working there. And I ended up taking a position somewhere else. So that's when I first realized the real power of home ownership, even in the workplace. And then, of course, over the years, as a marketer and a product manager, I experienced a lot of successes in my life, but I never really was able to go back to the passion that I had around home ownership. And it's funny because as you look back in time and you see, wow, all these dots actually do connect. I work for a health benefit company. I work for a financial service company. My wife and I, we started a real estate brokerage. And all of those pieces came together and made me realize, hey, we have all the framework to
Right.
create Nest Steps today. And it allowed for me to have the opportunity to really go back to my childhood passions, which is again the home itself.
And how do you how does it hit you then as someone who's been through that journey and has experienced working for a great, huge company, but maybe just the combination of where you're at financially and also where you were living, with a high cost of living, prevented you from being able to buy a house? How do you feel about the sort of really prevalent, like news articles, social media presence about younger generations, almost total cynicism about ever being able to afford a house? Like, how does that fit into this equation for you?
I think I have a very fairly good understanding of how they feel, right?
Mm,
We felt the same way, even though, the conditions were slightly different and so forth, but we felt the same way. We didn't know what to do. We weren't even sure if we could ever afford a home until we moved to another location. However, I would say this, what's hit me today is that there's actually quite a bit of strategies that are out there that help you get into a home. And a lot of people don't have access to that information.
mhm.
And I'll tell you why that it's so hard to get that information. If you were to go to a realtor today and you said, "Hey, I want to buy a home, but guess what? I'm not quite ready yet. Maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months." Most realtors will say, "Okay, that's fantastic. I'll keep you in mind. Let's connect maybe in about 6 months or something like that." But they're not going to sit there, at least probably the majority of them won't sit there and try to prepare you step by step, right? It's not going to happen. The reason is realtors are focused on, you know, clients who are ready to purchase or ready to sell.
Right.
And that's not a bad thing because it is a business for them. It's
Sure.
it's what they need to do. It's what they need to focus on. But access to information is not as readily available as you might think. So I talked to this one fella who told me that he spent 10 years saving for a home. And he said that information is readily available on the internet. Yeah, it may be on the internet, but is it the right information? Because
Yeah.
I could tell you that we have helped a lot of people in their early 20s who are still in college buy homes
Really?
because the strategy that is available to everyone isn't necessarily available on the internet. You see what I'm saying? So
I do.
the information is accessible, but not quite the way you think it is. And you have to curate that information. What's real and what's not real? A lot of people think they know what they're talking about, but that's not necessarily true. And so if you've sat there and you've saved 10 years to buy a home, then you may have missed out on some very important information. And that's the problem.
Yeah. No, I hear you, because there's also just a lot of noise on the internet too, right? There's a lot of noise. There are people who are sales organizations that, look, I don't want to, no shade on anybody, but I'm going to use the phrase, that are predatory mortgage loans too, that are trying to lock
Yeah.
people into something that is really not in their best interest or whatever. So it is hard to navigate. And I can relate on my end on the recruitment front, because you can find a job on the internet too. You can see what jobs are available. So you might think the information is readily available, but there's a chasm of difference between the information that I am privy to by being on the other side of it and what you see just on the forefront of jobs you can apply for on LinkedIn or whatever. So I hear you.
Yeah.
It's curating that information and getting people the real bespoke thing that makes sense for them in their case isn't as obvious to come by on the internet as possible. Even asking ChatGPT, no shade on ChatGPT, but ChatGPT may
No
be
shade.
just as confused as us sometimes about what's out there.
The AI platform is fantastic. There's a lot of great information, but you do have to be careful. You have to
Yeah,
question it sometimes, and I've done it many times. Right, the curation process is more complex than most people think. I think.
yeah, for sure. So the fascinating way that you positioned this to me initially when we began talking as well
Yeah.
is around the way you told your own story right now too, is the power of using assistance to home ownership in talent attraction or retention for that matter. But
Yeah.
you lived it yourself, right? You were just kind of like, I'm going to leave this huge company in favor of going somewhere where I can afford a home. And so the power of that tool, if it's in a company's tool belt, to then try to attract talent and win that talent in an offer war. I think this is really where we're coming from here, if I understand correctly.
Absolutely. There's a study that was done, I think is middle of 2024, where they had hundreds, I think it was like about 800 responses, of which 41% of them on average said that they would leave their current employer for another employer that offered some sort of housing assistance. That's a huge chunk of
Yeah.
people that would want it that, right? It makes a lot of sense. And if you think about why that makes sense, I think, like I said, first and foremost, it's not just about shelter, it's also aspiration, right? If you think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are you familiar with that,
I
the
am, and
pyramid?
but like vaguely, but we talked about this, and please go on. I think this is super key to it, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you think about that diagram, that pyramid diagram, the base of that pyramid are the things that you need, right? Your shelter, safety, and so forth, right? But as you move up that pyramid, you have self-actualization, identity, and so forth. Very few things map to everything on there. Housing does. Housing aligns with every aspect of that pyramid. And so it explains the motivation behind why you or myself or anybody else want to own a home. And so that desire to actually go where somewhere an employer that can actually provide you that housing assistance is tremendous, especially in the face of high interest rates, um, affordability issues, and so forth. Right? This is an opportunity for you to get ahead, and that's just hard to match uh, through any other type of benefit. It's very difficult. I would add one more thing. You know, we talk about 401ks and health insurance in every conversation that I have with employers.
for sure.
Those are cornerstones of
Yeah.
benefits, right? But I'll tell you what's really interesting about those benefits. Those benefits aren't just dealing with workplace experiences. They deal with life experiences. They have impact and influence on what happens outside of work. And same thing with housing,
Yep.
right?
Good point.
Because those benefits address the whole employee, not just the employee that you see when they come in through the door.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there's something interesting to the idea of having a company like Nest Steps having a program that has a good reputation so people can trust that the information and the assistance or whatever else. So in other words, I understand a benefit to having the program and using it as a value add to try to sell, like as a recruiter, and be like, hey,
Mhm.
there's these guys have the Nest Steps program. Have you heard of this program? Check it out online. People really like it. It helps
Yeah,
them buy a house or whatever else. It's, you know what I mean? So as opposed to just an employer being like, we'll help you buy a house. I think that there is an inherent cynicism about home ownership right now that on a cold recruiter reaching out to somebody, it'd be like, they're going to help me buy a house. How exactly? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the catch
sure.
here? Right. But I think if you have a program that's a name, that's a brand that people can go to, that they can trust, that's a third party kind of entity that's involved, I could see a value in
Yeah,
that from a recruiting candidate attraction kind of perspective.
yeah. Can I just share a quick experience I had, I
Please.
think about a month ago? We were holding a workshop for renters here, and we had about 30 people in the office. And these are renters whose employers were not engaged in Nest Steps. But our workshop was the same content that we would provide within an employer setting. Okay. So it's the exact same content. But somewhere in the middle of that presentation, our presenter made a comment that, by the way, your employers can participate in this Nest Steps program and so forth if they provide contributions and they actually enable us to be in the employer environment and actually do all these presentations and these education. And one gal raised her hand, and this is not in any way exaggeration. She raised her hand. She stopped the conversation. She goes, "If I had that in my company, if I had that as a benefit, I would never leave." And that's
Mhm.
almost verbatim, right?
Yeah.
And then she said, I would never risk a benefit like that for a few dollars more. So if you just think about that comment there, not only did she express a deeper sense of loyalty to that employer, but she said she would actually forego incremental pay raises for something like that. That's a pretty bold statement. But she's not the only one. I mean, everyone in that room at that moment nodded and started chiming in. So
Yep.
my point of it is, if that had impact on a group of people who we had never met before until that first day, eh, you would have the same impact. You can only imagine the same impact if you're trying to recruit somebody from another company and say, hey, look, we're not just going to provide you with great pay, a great culture, and so forth, right? But we're also going to help you get anchored into the community. We're going to help you achieve financial wellness through home ownership.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible value proposition.
Yeah, it's like a specifically curated and directed financial advisor kind of benefit, really, right? That's helping
Yeah,
them in that regard, and in a bespoke way, which I think is interesting, right? Because not everybody is going to come into the company at the same point in their life and their journey. Like you're saying, you got your 20-year-olds who
that's
are
right.
coming fresh out of college. Got some people who are maybe 30, 40 years old who don't own a home and who are looking for that benefit. Um, so I, I think that the trust is a big thing, right? That people would trust the program and
Yeah.
the advice and the information of the Nest Steps program. And I believe you said it comes in the form of like a course or steps that they can take. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
It is. It may help if I just kind of share with you the three components of
Yeah,
our
please.
our approach. There's three things that we do, and it does come with the course, the educational courses. But the first thing we do is we put them into a platform, a SaaS technology, a SaaS software, if you will, that we purpose built for this program. And the idea behind the technology is to enable them to achieve healthy financial behaviors. So I'm going to kind of dive in here for just a second because this is a really critical piece. Look, and the idea here is that we have to get rid of unconscious spending. When paychecks are deposited for employees, they go into a checking account for most people,
Mhm.
probably 90+% of most people,
Yeah,
right? And then what people do is they move money into their savings consciously. And the reality is that just never happens for most people because they unconsciously spend because they have money in their checking account. And so what we want to do is change the format. So we want to create a brand new account for them where the money goes directly into that account and then use the platform that we built to make auto transfers
mm,
based on your budget for spend from that new account into your existing spending accounts like your checking accounts, and some people have multiple spending accounts, right?
sure, yeah,
So that's the first piece. Within that platform, we're gamifying it so that you are encouraged to keep your savings at a certain level to meet your goal. So one of your goal may be, I want to save $50,000 towards down payment of a home, right? And so we've gamified it in a way that, hey, you've got to reach this milestone. When you get this milestone, you get a badge. You're given some visibility in how you're performing overall compared to maybe your peers within the organization and so forth. But we want to create an environment where we can accelerate savings. So that's really, really important.
yeah,
The second component is we want to empower people. This is where the education comes in, right? We want to empower people to understand what it takes to prepare yourself for home ownership. So what we'll do is we'll go in with typically 6 educational workshops per quarter, and they're typically 1 to 2 weeks apart. And so it's a series of progressive content teaching you, to understand the market conditions, to understand where are you going to get your funds from? How do you leverage this Nest Steps program? And if you already own a home, what do you need to do to make sure the value of that home continues to rise? Or ultimately, how can you leverage home ownership for long-term financial stability? The education is then paired with one-on-one guidance from our licensed advisors. So we have 2 advisors for each employee. One is the home advisor. These are licensed real estate professionals who have gone through our program and know exactly how to train the program. And then number 2, we have licensed financial service advisors who are helping them with budgeting and giving them advice on, general education around good, healthy financial habits. So that's the empowerment part. And then the third part of it is really you got to incentivize people, right? We've enabled them, we've empowered them, we have to incentivize them. And so we work with the employer to develop a contribution model that makes sense, that doesn't really tap and dip into their bottom line. And so what we're analyzing, what we're looking for is what is your current turnover cost? What is your current turnover rate? And what can we reasonably expect to affect in terms of turnovers? I'll give you a quick example of this that's real life case studies. This is from Fannie Mae in the early 1990s and Aurora Health. In both cases, they saw somewhere between 50% and 65% reduction in turnover rates. That's massive.
sorry, Larry,
That
this
is
is going to keep
massive.
happening. Let me get my lovely kitty out of the frame here. who is going to keep
No worries.
attacking the television. Give me one moment.
No worries.
Pardon me. Unexpected cameo.
Yeah, no worries.
Please, let's get back to the
Life
case
happens.
study.
But like I was saying, that they were able to achieve 50 to 65% improvement in their turnover rate. And so if you think about what it costs you for each turnover, there are multiple studies out there that have been done. It's somewhere between 50% to 200% of that employee's salary. That's a big chunk of change. So when you look back at those case studies, you can only imagine that they were able to save a ton of money. And so the thinking here is, in terms of a contribution, how do we offset the turnover cost? By investing, not in replacing employees, but investing in keeping employees.
Right. Absolutely.
That's the important piece. So those are the three key components. And we build trust over time, because you're going to find that the platform itself is helping you to develop very, very healthy financial habits. And they are habits. It's teaching you to have discipline in the way you spend your money. And then you're going to find value in, of course, having licensed advisors helping you all along your journey. I mean, where can you get two licensed advisors helping you without paying gobs and gobs of money, right?
But that's
And
it.
so, the incredible value here is that it's being provided by your employer, right? And if you're an employee, you're not just trusting the Nestlé program, you're trusting your employer. You're building a relationship, and you're anchoring yourself to the employer because of that.
Yeah. I think that all of that's great. I think that there's a couple things you mentioned in there too in the case study that are huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
to reduce turnover 50 to 60% in an organization, big or small, is enormous. And I know this
It is.
firsthand from working in recruitment and also for being a rec to rec where I service other recruiting agencies. Companies spend a lot on hiring. And if
Yeah.
you hire someone through a recruiter and you're paying fees and whatever, and they last less than a year, it can be devastating for everybody, and especially if they were just attracted away for some reason or whatever. Like a good employee who's performing well, but was attracted away by another company who was able to offer them something really compelling. It can be heartbreaking, whether they've been there for 1 year or 10 years or 20, right? I mean, so I think that the idea of hitting someone in something that matters to them that isn't just dollars and cents makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I would add to that also that I think a lot of companies don't necessarily have enough visibility into the consequences of losing an employee. I mean,
Mm,
they see it on the balance sheet, right? I mean, this is the actual hard cost they spend on the advertising, the hard cost they spend on, bringing in an external recruiter, or the amount of time that your in-house recruiters is spending. But just think about it. Anyone who's ever had to hire somebody knows how painful it can be. You're pulling your hair out because your team is stretched. The stress level increases, your productivity goes down, operations slow down, and in some cases, you have a loss of institutional knowledge. That's not even quantifiable,
that's a good
right?
point.
And so when you look at the studies and what they're trying to account for, the 50% to 200% of that employee's salary being the actual true cost, it doesn't necessarily even include some of those things that I mentioned. Those are those are things that we all have to deal with. And I'm going to be honest with you, when you have a lot of turnovers, it only perpetuates more turnovers because people feel
Yeah,
like
that's
it's
true.
never going to get better. My job is extremely difficult. I'm wearing multiple hats. I'm only being paid for one job, not two jobs, and so forth. And so the cost is enormous. And we need to get employers, especially executive teams, to stop thinking about it like it's an HR issue. This is
Mhm.
a financial and operational risk. And you have to start thinking about it that way, because otherwise you're going to miss the boat. You're going to miss the true impact that turnovers have on every company.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that, like you're saying, the loss of institutional knowledge and the sort of impact on the rest of the existing employees is huge, even if you don't start an avalanche of people leaving, which unfortunately sometimes happens. Um, and I love that it's something that to me, I'm often speaking to business owners as well, right? So there's the
Yeah.
recruiting piece where we're speaking to candidates, but then a lot of what I do is on the business development side. So I'm speaking to business owners or VPs or whatever who have to hire. And so I also can see both sides of the perspective, right? Offering something like this, interestingly, you have a commitment level from both sides, from both the employee and the employer. So the employer isn't just thinking, oh, great. So you want me to just give more and find this money somewhere and just throw more money at the problem. But it isn't really about just the money, right? It's about incentivizing them, maybe by assisting on a down payment or something like that, out of budget, that is from a retention standpoint. And the person in question, the candidate or the employee, is also going through your courses for to improve their financial habits and stuff like that. So there's a, it's not like they're just saying give me money please and that's why I'm coming with you, right? There's a mutual commitment to do something that actually impacts the life of the employee in a really positive way.
Absolutely. And here's the funny thing, right? To this day, there are a lot of employers who think if I can draw a candidate or even keep a candidate by just giving him more money up front, that'll do the trick, right? And then to some extent, the research indicates, yeah, it does work, maybe, but for a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Because it goes both ways. If I have a great employee, if I have great talent that I'm holding on to right now, and the reason why this person is leaving is because they're not getting enough pay. Okay, maybe I'll offer more money. But guess what? What if somebody else comes around and offers that person even more money? Right?
100%.
It doesn't. That's not true loyalty. And in fact, what happens is you're creating a brand new environment. If it doesn't already exist, you're creating an environment where every employee starts to realize the only thing that matters is how much you get paid. And so you're creating less loyalty and more focus on the actual number, the dollar amount that's being paid. And none of that equates to loyalty because, like I said, anybody can come and offer a few dollars more.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree with you. And that's like best practice from like an agency recruiter like myself. If money is the main motivator and there isn't another real reason why the person is dedicated to this job or company or idea, the likelihood of it panning out long term is pretty low. Right.
Very low. Yeah.
It's very low for it to last even a year. Um there's another piece. So like in my seat in what I do and what my clients do as recruiters, a lot of it is trying to attract the right people. And since COVID, there's been a big up and down around remote work. So a lot of
Mm,
people saw that things were going fully remote in 2020, 2021, and even 22. A lot of people moved out of high cost city centers to places where it was more affordable for them to own a home, bought a home, and then now that
yeah.
we're 2024 and especially 25 was a big year for being back in office, a lot of
Yeah.
people were faced with this ultimatum of, yeah, I got to either go back and sell my house, I guess, and go back into the city center, or be unemployed and have to find another job. Because so the big attraction was, hey, to people in my seat, hey, can you get me something that's remote, fully remote forever? Because now I'm in this
Right.
quandary where I, again, chasing the home ownership got me out of New York or Chicago or LA or whatever into either the suburbs or maybe going to Connecticut or whatever it was, you know what I mean, in order to get away from the higher cost of housing. But
Right.
now remote isn't the standard anymore. We're going back very much into a hybrid model where people need to be geographically close to where the office is. How do you
Absolutely.
feel that I feel like your program is kind of a positive in that sense, that you could sort of turn a negative into a positive that way.
I think so. I mean, it's the same thing as back then when they said I can go somewhere, work remotely, and I can go somewhere where I can actually afford a home. Same reason why a program like this would draw somebody back into a
Into the
more
city.
urban area,
Yeah.
right? Exact same reason. Because I think at the end of the day, I what you just stated really just puts that exclamation point of what I've shared in my own personal history, right?
Yeah.
About how important it is to feel like you have a place to call home, right? It doesn't matter where it is, you need to have a home. You're either renting or you're owning, right? But at the end of the day, you still have to have a home. And if you can call it a home where you don't have to throw money away and where you're actually building financial stability over time, that's all the more positive. So if you can provide a program like this for employees to bring them back into the urban areas or the city areas, as you're saying, then I think it can only be a positive for anyone who's doing the recruiting work.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, I mean, pardon me, where I'm from in Montreal, and in like French cultures, as far as I understand, it's a very like it's a lot of there's a lot of rental culture. It's not necessarily a social stigma to not be a homeowner necessarily, but I do think that in major cities, from all the ones that I've spoken to in North America anyway, it isn't that stable, right? A lot of buildings get bought, torn down to make room for condos. There's turnover. There's renovictions, which is big in Toronto. I don't know how big that is in the U.S. necessarily, but it's where the landlords have a certain leeway to be able to say, listen, I'm renovating this building and I'm going to zhuzh it up like crazy and charge a bunch more. So we're going to give our tenants X amount of time, and then they're out. So there's
Yeah.
also just a lack of, especially in millennials and Gen Z, there's a lack of, there's a bit of a cynicism around home ownership that almost pushes them to be digital nomads to an extent. It's like, well, what's the renting is impermanent. I'm never going to afford a home. Let me just travel around forever and kind of work gigs.
Yeah, and is that the because they feel like they can't afford it, or is it because they actually don't really want to own a home, right? So there's a question about
For sure.
what is actually triggering that. But I will say this: another study had indicated that, and this was I think 2024 as well, that 8 in 10, at least in the United States, 8 in 10 Americans feel home ownership is still very part of the American dream, and it's still very part of their journey in life.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I will say also that you made a comment about the stigma around renting. I don't think that's necessarily a stigma. I think it's more of this idea that most people understand that when you're renting a home, and let's say you're spending $2,000 or so a month on renting a home, okay, the $2,000 goes to building equity, but not for you. It goes to building equity for your landlord,
Yeah,
and so
for
you're
sure.
never getting ahead. It's impossible to get ahead if all your money is going to helping somebody else achieve financial wellness. And so I think maybe less of a stigma, but more of a reality around
Yeah.
finances, right? So that if you want to get ahead in life, if you want to stop throwing money away, you have to start owning rather than renting.
Well, yeah, and I do think that this is timely because I think that there's a bit of a misnomer around the fact that, listen, things are getting more expensive, groceries are getting more expensive, life is getting more
It is.
expensive. Salaries and pay aren't necessarily going up for a lot of people in tandem with cost of living going up. And so a lot of people are like, oh, there's again an inherent cynicism when they hear statements like that from me, guy like me who works in recruitment, which is just that these are just facts, reports all over the place to support that. So it's obviously not just my opinion, but the point is that it's never been more of a good time to look into informing yourself to know what you can do to try to better your future so that you're not caught in a bad situation when the cost of living continues to go up, perhaps not in
Yeah.
tandem with what you're investing, right? So not having that financial literacy or getting yourself into a better situation is very dangerous now. It's not the kind of safe mentality of abundance that we had in North America in the 90s or in the 70s or in the 50s. You know what I mean? Where you could be like, it'll all be okay. It's fine. Like everything's just going to be fine. I think you actually need to put effort and thought and strategy and care into your future in kind of a rather urgent way. The way that things are just very complex right now, very
Yeah.
complex.
I think a majority of especially Gen Z and millennials feel like by the time they're ready to retire, or at least at the age of retirement, that Social Security here in the United States won't even be around. A
For
lot of
sure.
them don't. Yeah, a lot of them don't even feel like the 401k will be enough. They think they're going to run out of money. So the majority of people have that perception, and so they're looking for other things that they can do in order to supplement that, right? And look, I think I would be stretching to say that most people are thinking 30 years ahead, but I do think that they know that they have to, at the very least, get on the right path.
Yeah.
I think that that's the important piece. And they know that if it's not going to be around 30 years from now or so, or 40 years from now, I need to at least make sure that I'm okay today and the next, and on that right path and building the right foundation, period.
Totally. We did have one comment come in from LinkedIn here, which a LinkedIn user here says, "Hey Rick and Larry, nowadays in India and globally, but mostly in India, at the time of yearly increment, companies are not increasing the salary. They are hiring junior candidates that they are willing to let go of their valuable employee who has more knowledge."
Yeah.
Um, I definitely not just in India.
Yeah,
I don't question it. I certainly know that that's a thing that's happening in the United States and Canada. That we're in a period of restructuring, which has a lot to do with reducing headcount amounts, like costs, and hiring people at lower base salaries. Full stop. I mean, we're
yeah,
in a mode of that market correction, as they're terming it, where kind of everybody's gone through at least one restructure in the
yeah.
past 12 months. Um, Larry, how are you seeing that reality in your, either from a real estate perspective or just from this program? How does that strike you?
Well, I think first and foremost, from an employer perspective, when everybody does the same thing, you're also creating greater competition for the same talent, right? As an employer, if you're all competing for, less senior talent, that means more opportunities for the employee to look for an organization that will value them. Okay. And so, what are the opportunities for those specific employees, and what is the company offering me as an employee or as an applicant? Or you're going to be looking at pay, you're going to be looking at the culture, you're going to look at compensation. So again, I would say that as an employer, this is something a program like this is going to be something that will help you in terms of your recruiting effort. But I think there's maybe a separate issue that we need to think about, right? Which is, the more senior people are being let go and so forth, because they're settling for younger generation, maybe a different group of workforce. I think I think the companies that do that are making a terrible trade-off. Institutional knowledge is one of the things that we've talked about. That's very important. And I think that if your focus is on bringing low pay employees and they turn out to be great talent, what are you going to do? Are you just going to let them go? So you're creating your own problem as you go, right? You may say to yourself, okay, we can't afford better talent today, but if we continue down this path, we're going to have the same problem over and over and over again because you have to rehire people. And the process of rehiring people is not only difficult, but it's not just the process of hiring that you have to think about at this point. The more people you have to rehire, the more effort you have to put into reinforcing your culture. And the reality is that turnover rate is going to work counter to all your efforts on building culture. It's going to erode that culture. And so from my perspective, there are two things that are that we have to think about, right? From a recruiting perspective, it's going to be something that you're going to need. You're going to need some kind of advantage in drawing employees, especially in a very competitive environment. But again, you also want to keep them. You don't want to perpetuate this once they get to age whatever it is, which is illegal, right? But for someone who's maybe less qualified or less experienced, you're going to settle for that person. Well, what that ultimately means is eventually they're going to get the experience that they need to be a much more potent employee. And if you let go, then you have to start over. It's a terrible cycle. It's a terrible cycle that does not feed into healthy working environments.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, you hit on a lot of great points there. And I got to say, I don't think that these trends ever last for too long. I
Yeah,
think we've been in a period of change, that there's been a lot of changes. COVID was a big disruptor. Obviously, there's international conflict going on, which is a disruptor on things like, stock market, price of gas, et cetera, which changes the game in terms of people needing to restructure, or their budgets are getting thrown out the window. And I mean, then there's AI in some industries, which has come in to change what tasks need to be done by humans and which tasks don't, that can be automated away. So I think we have a lot of different big changes in flux simultaneously. So I think we're seeing this kind of thing happen a little more than normal for the past, let's say, since COVID. So let's call it 5-6 years. But I
yeah.
also think that it isn't something that's ever permanent, right? Like it to your point, it doesn't even make business sense after a while, because why you keep starting over again? Like, it just, your company will be in great jeopardy. I think now a lot of people are constantly going to consulting firms or getting investment from private equity firms, and all of them kind of work on, okay, how are we going to, in a short-term way, how are we going to turn this ship around? That sort of like, let's try and survive mentality, I don't think is permanent, right? I think that
Yeah,
eventually people are going to want to find good talent and retain them, and that's how you become a solvent business, really.
absolutely. 100% agree. Uh, Employee longevity is going to help you with efficiency. It's going to help you with building on the knowledge that you've built out over the years. It's going to cut down on expensive turnovers. I mean, there's a lot to be said for having very, very tenured employees within your organization. There's obviously people on the other side who'll argue, hey, sometimes when they're very tenured, they're stuck in their ways and so forth. But that's an issue of culture.
Mhm.
That's not
Yeah,
an issue of tenure, right?
yeah.
If the culture is focused on being open-minded and being nimble and so forth, that's not something that you have to worry about. So
Yeah, totally agree. That's one of the things that I like about your proposition in general, Larry, is that it's rooted in a kind of an optimism and a positivity, not just about the present, but about the future, which I think is very absent. I think that there's a friend of mine who works in marketing who's very big on the term, and I don't remember who coined the term that he's quoting from here, but it's kind of like the death of the future is something that I think a lot of younger people are facing, is in their minds, they abandon hope on having things that are quote unquote American dream like adjacent, right? Like, having
mhm,
financial stability, owning a house, the cynicism about their employers and whatever, because they hear a lot of rhetoric like this, which again, they're not wrong. A lot of people are getting restructured. A lot of people can't afford to buy a house or a condo. So it is true. And they're seeing news reports and whatever. But I think it is important to have companies like yourself or attitudes like this that bring a little bit of optimism about the future. Like, hey, you know what? There's actually things you can do. You're not powerless. There's stuff you can do on both sides. All of this makes sense. It's got a kind of a humanism to it that it's like, listen, if we both just look at this as, you know what I mean, and see the human impact as well, we see that it also makes business sense. And that's one of
yeah.
the probably my favorite aspect of what you're talking about here.
Can I add also that you kind of highlighted on the, this negative view at times, right? That there's some realities out there, right? Affordability seems to be an issue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I will say this, um, affordability, let's tackle that head on. You can't address affordability by forcing home prices to come down because two-thirds, at least in the United States, I don't know what it's like in Canada, and at least the ratio, but two-thirds of Americans own home. Only a third of them, close to 40%, actually are renting. So if you force prices to come down, you're erasing the equity of those people who own a home. Okay, so that's not how you address it. And so then you're looking at what can we people do? What can actually be done to help people to get into homes and so forth? Can the government help? Uh, Government can only do so much, right? At the end of the day. And so we look at what can be done. Is it by the individual? Yes, the individual can do better at perhaps saving, right? Finding
Mhm.
ways to eliminate unconscious savings. But what can the employer do?
Yeah.
This is a win-win situation. This is a new player in the home ownership space. If the employer can get involved, the employee wins. There's greater optimism because all of a sudden you have a new channel, a new means, a new tool to get yourself in a situation where you're financially a little bit better off. And for the employer, again, we've already talked about this. We've elaborated the power it has on driving loyalty and retention. So it's a win-win situation, not only for the employer, but employees, and frankly, even for the community, right?
Yeah.
People the more people who buy homes, the greater the stability in individual finances, the better for the society that you're in, right? So I think it's a win-win situation for, again, multiple different parties in this scenario.
For sure. And I think, right down to getting curated and trusted information to prevent people from not only their bad habits, like that's an element of it. I think giving people just good advice is great and telling them how to, save better, but also making sure that they don't fall victim to some of these more predatory mortgages that get sold very hard
Yes.
to people who really want a house, but then can't really afford it or don't have the best credit, but could still get into a better situation. getting simple advice of like, no, hold out for a year, do this, and then you can do that. That kind of confident information, again, I think would help people have an optimism that there's steps they can take that will prevent them from going down this path of being, screwed over, for lack of a better word, in a situation that's not to their benefit.
Yeah, you bring a great point because at the end of the day, look, healthy financial behaviors is so important because you may be able to get into the home, right? Even with our program, we'll get you in the home, but that in itself is not enough. You have to stay in the home,
Yeah, well, yeah, this
right?
is the thing.
And so when you look at the foreclosures and the short sales in the U.S., there's a disproportionate number of those that come from government-backed loans. What does that say? It says that maybe a lot of these people aren't financially versed or not as well disciplined in their financial behavior, right? And so what we're trying to do is make sure that you have the right behavior, not only to get into the home, but to stay into the home and then build long-term financial wellness through that program.
Well, that's it. And I think that if someone's willing to do those courses and get that advice and do the work and put in the time, I think that incentivizes the employer to feel more like giving some sort of incentive to the employee, like
Yeah,
that mutual investment of time and
right.
interest in each other. I think, like you're saying, builds trust. It shows that the company cares about the employee to an extent. And then I think it's less risky for them to do a financial incentive of some sort to try to help somebody get into either a down payment or whatever, some sort of financial incentive toward buying the house as well. Like, I just think that it isn't just an exchange of money, right? It's not just money changing hands. It's people
Yeah.
actually working together toward a common goal that changes people's lives. I think if that's truly the spirit of it, I think that that's pretty transformative.
I think so. I think so. And just giving people money, it doesn't always work anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
there's thing. I mean, there's a thing called marginal. What is it? Propensity to the propensity to consume. The marginal propensity to consume. Right. Basically says the more money you make, the more
The
money
more
you
you spend.
spend.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're in the same situation. Someone who makes $100,000 versus someone who makes $50,000. You're likely to have the same cash flow issues all along. So you want to invest in things that actually make sense for both parties.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So we touched on it very, very lightly, and I know it's not the main focus of your company, but
Mhm.
this podcast often is touches on AI and how it's changing the game, both from a hiring perspective or what jobs are available, or in this case, even the housing market. Um, I'm just going to sort of surprise attack you with that question and see. Again, I'm always trying to advocate for a more humanist approach, right? This is called recruiting EQ. And I
Yeah.
think that using employers helping people get toward home ownership is an EQ driven lure and not just a cash lure. And that's why I like it, right? Because I feel like it is an emotional intelligence to say, hey, all parties benefit, the culture benefits, the community benefits. Those are the residual benefits that interest me the most in what you're talking about.
Mhm.
How do you feel that AI comes into the equation in a way that perhaps dehumanizes or helps, or how do you feel about it?
I think AI helps quite a bit actually. And to be honest with you, we're actually in the process of infusing AI technology into our own platform. We keep the human aspect of things, but there are a lot of mundane activities that go on in helping someone stay on course, right? For instance, if they're trying to save, again, $50,000 towards the down payment of a home, there's a lot of little things that can be prompted through AI to help you keep moving forward. You don't necessarily need a financial service advisor calling you, hey, did you do this today? Or
Right.
did you do this are you have you set up your meetings and so forth, right? You don't need that. What you need is real strategic advice from that individual who actually understands your situation. So I think at the end of the day, AI will help people in terms of building healthy financial behaviors. I think AI will help them in the process of home ownership. From a recruiting perspective, I'm going to step outside my home ownership role here for a second.
Do
I
it,
think
Larry.
I am, and I'll tell you, and I'll give you a little secret because before I ended up starting this business, I shelved a separate company, a separate product, and that was really an AI driven product to help get through some of the challenges that recruiters like you have.
Mm,
I'll tell you, I just posted a job recently, and I got, I think, within hours, 70 some odd employee applications. And out of the 70, I think it was 72, I got one that was semi-qualified. Even though I put pre-screening questions, they'll just, I'm not joking, okay? I'll ask a question like, you have to have a specific experience, and do you have that experience? They'll say yes, and you look at the resume, they have zero experience. So what that does is it gums up those inboxes.
Yep.
You look at LinkedIn, you put a VP roll up on LinkedIn, and you'll get hundreds, if not over 1,000 applicants within a couple of days. Who's actually going to look through that? Who's going to spend the time? I talked to recruiters in the past, and they say they'll typically spend somewhere about 5 to 6 seconds per resume. That's what they've told me. Well, it's kind of hard to really understand the context thereof, right? Sometimes people use the wrong language and so forth. So I think AI can be leveraged to help streamline some of the processes
For
for
sure.
curating the applications. So from a recruiting perspective, I think that's going to be very valuable for you guys. I don't think it'll ever replace the human assessment, the human touch, whether it be in recruiting or in retention. I think the human part will always be there, but I think the AI will help make things easier along the way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there's a lot of fear around what AI can do. I don't know if you've seen these AI agents that show up like an avatar and like,
Yeah,
"Hi, I'm Rick. I'm here to interview today. I have these questions for you." But at the same time, I think it's a massive reduction on what a conversation is with somebody else. I mean, if you're like awake and paying attention and actively listening to them, you can tell if you ask them certain questions, if they get nervous, excited, upset, whatever, even if they hide it a little bit. I don't think that just simply reading someone's emotions and reading the room, or how do they make you feel? Do they have a weird vibe? Is there something off about this conversation? Things like that would flag a human being who's doing this job well. I don't know that, because AI doesn't experience emotions, at least not yet. But I don't think that it's ever going to be able to replace the emotional side of it, which I actually think is most of the job, if you ask me.
well, I think you're right. What though? But I will say this: I think AI will do something, maybe even well, one, they're going to be more efficient in like mass quantities.
Yeah.
But I also believe that AI can also eliminate some of the natural biases that we all have, right?
Oh, sure.
And I've seen it. We've all seen it, right? When you're going through the interviews in a panel, and you see questions that someone's asking that you didn't ask the other person, and you're reacting to this person very, very adversely to the other person. So there are natural biases. But so the point of it is that I think there are some things that AI can do even better than humans, but you're never going to be able to replace some of the things that are required for humans to actually do themselves. I
Yeah.
just don't see it. So
Do you see, either obviously through your company at Nest Steps, but have you noticed a change in your market, in your industry, or in hiring, even in the past 12 months? Like, how have things evolved or changed in the past year or two in your day to day?
I'm gonna say I actually am seeing a lot of desperation. Okay,
Really? Yeah.
I am seeing a lot of people apply for work that they actually have zero background in,
Right.
and they'll say anything whatsoever in order to just submit a resume. There are times when I sit down, I'll do a job interview and so forth, and you start asking them the question, and it's like, wait, what? That's not even in the same industry. That's not even in the same discipline whatsoever. And so you start to see a lot of people just throwing resumes out there, anything out there,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know if that's been around forever and so forth, right? Much in the past as I have seen today, right? I think people have become desperate in a way that they will just throw anything out there, hoping for someone to nibble on that bait, and it's not helpful.
No.
It's not helpful for the employer because you start to get desensitized. You start to say, okay, 100 came in. I might look at maybe the first page of it, and I'm going to walk away from it. And so now you have a whole list of hundreds of qualified candidates that are sitting on the third, fourth, fifth page and so forth, and they're never going to get viewed.
Yeah,
How is
that's
that
true.
fair? How is that fair to anybody? It's not fair to the employee. It's not fair to the candidate. You see what I'm saying? And so that's what I'm seeing. There's just more spamming, I guess you could call it, spamming of applications.
Yeah, it's true. It's quantity over quality. Which I think for some people anyway comes from a place like you're saying of desperation. They just need to find work. Obviously,
Yeah,
there's been a lot of change. Whenever there's a lot of market change, unfortunately, the unemployment goes up, and I feel like the numbers get fudged a lot. Like to say, oh, regionally unemployment's gone down. And it's like, well, there's a lot
right.
more desperation too, like gone down how. I have a lot of questions always around the way that some of that stuff's reported. But I do feel like, and I mean, this is just maybe selfish on my part. I'm a rec to rec, right? So I recruit recruiters, but a lot of the people I speak to are recruiters, and talk to a recruiter to see to get information. I think that the human quotient again is what wins, right? Talk
Yeah,
to people on LinkedIn. Don't just send your resume out everywhere. Ask for advice. Ask recruiters for advice. Talk to them and see what can you do to make your profile or your more attractive. Figure out what's going on by speaking to humans who work in the industry rather than just spamming your resume out.
yeah, absolutely. I agree. Those are great points.
Well, thank you, Larry. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you for even reaching out and proposing this because it's not even a program that I was aware existed. We have some things like this in Canada, even too, that are part of employee assistance programs and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
that I know of, I have not seen something that's comprehensive the way you've got these three different elements to it,
yeah.
and that can actually be used from a candidate attraction tool. I think, if you guys are interested, employers who are interested in the program as well, you can reach out to Larry. What's the best way to reach out to you, Larry?
First thing, you can always visit our website, learn more about it. It's www.neststepsbenefits.com. That's nest like bird nest. So neststepsbenefits.com. Otherwise, I think it'd be great if you just want to connect with me on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Larry Salazar. I think my profile is Larry S. But you should be able to find me pretty easily on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with you, where we can, exchange ideas and share some of the insights that I have on a regular basis.
Thanks a lot, Larry. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think that there's, even from a recruiting standpoint, I look forward to more solutions like this that are rooted in positivity about the present and the future, especially with people going back into the office. And I think this is a really great idea. So I appreciate it.
Awesome.
And your Larry's LinkedIn is going to be associated to this event as well, guys who are watching this on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to him. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about recruiting EQ. You can catch us most Wednesdays at noon EST, either here live or feel free to listen after the fact wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks a lot and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye bye.